The room was designed to make you feel small. That was the whole point. I walked into the Galactic Council chambers carrying a briefcase, a translation earpiece, and 14 years of being told to be patient. The chamber ceiling was 400 meters above my head. I know because I looked it up before I arrived. I am not the kind of person who lets architecture surprise her. My name is Mara Reyes. I am 47 years old. I am officially listed on the Council's attendance register as Human Observer, Provisional Status, which the translation matrix renders as something closer to tolerated witness. Not an ambassador, not a delegate, a witness they were tolerating. My seat was in section Peripheral 7. I want you to understand what that means. There are 37 recognized species in the Galactic Council. The Velhari sit in the second ring. The Solon Compact sit in the third. The Kadrith, who called this meeting, sit at the center dais under lights that make their bioluminescent skin look like something you would see in a dream and wake up from breathing hard. Section Peripheral 7 is not a ring. It is a ledge. It is the architectural equivalent of a folding chair set up outside a door. I sat in it. I opened my briefcase. I took out my notebook and my pen. Around me, the chamber filled. 37 species in various stages of biological improbability. The Vreth arrived as a contained atmospheric event, a gold-green gas that moved with deliberate intelligence through a sealed transport sphere. The Solon Compact entered in a formation of 9 harmonics pulsing from their chest cavities at a frequency the earpiece translated as formal greeting, subordinate register, which made the man next to me, Owen Hart, my council-assigned aide, 26 years old, first posting, still at the stage where he found all of this beautiful, grab his sternum and wince. "You get used to it," I told him. He nodded like he believed me. I did not tell him that I never had. The Kadrith first voice took the dais. 9 feet tall, 7 eyes arranged in a constellation across a face that had no mouth in any position I could identify, and yet it spoke, and the earpiece made the sound into words, and the words were very clear. This session is called to conclude the 14-year assessment of the species designated human, originating from the biotic world catalogued as Sol 3. 14 years. I had been alive for 33 of them before first contact. I had spent 14 of the years since sitting in this room, in this ledge with this earpiece, waiting for this sentence. The council has reached consensus. The chamber was quiet. The Vreth stopped moving. Even the Solon harmonics dropped below audible range. Following full review of developmental capacity, interstellar infrastructure, treaty compatibility, and potential for reciprocal contribution to the Accord, the Council designates the human species as Class 4 unindustrialized biotic matter. Owen wrote something in his notepad. His hand was shaking slightly. I watched him write it and thought about the word unindustrialized and what it meant that they had chosen that word specifically, and what it meant that they had not chosen a worse one, and what it meant that they were allowed to choose any of them. The secondary designation, for administrative purposes, will be recorded as, the first voice said. The earpiece took a half-second longer than usual. Insignificant. Not an insult, I want to be clear about that. It was not delivered with contempt or with anger. It was delivered the way a technician delivers a test result. A category, a box on a form, rights null, protection exempt, a footnote with a pulse. 37 species responded in their various ways. The Velhari delegates produced a low, resonant tone. The Solon Compact's harmonics shifted to something the earpiece called procedural affirmation. The Kadrith's bioluminescent patterns cycled through gold and white in what I had learned over 14 years was their version of satisfaction. Owen put down his pen. I opened my notebook. I wrote one word. Kepler. I closed the notebook. The Kadrith first voice continued speaking, something about the administrative implications of the new designation, something about the transition period for affected territories. I heard the words. I processed them the way you process weather. Noted, filed, not surprised. I raised my hand. Owen looked at me like I had stood up in church at the wrong moment. The floor recognition system, which I had read the manual for because I am the kind of person who reads the manual, requires a minimum of 3 seconds of sustained signal to register a formal floor request from an observer unit. I held my hand in the recognition field for exactly 3 seconds. The system registered my request. The Cadrith first voice paused. Its 7 eyes moved to section peripheral 7. I had the distinct impression it was trying to remember what exactly was kept in section peripheral 7. The floor does not recognize observer units during designation proceedings. I lowered my hand. I picked up my pen. Owen exhaled. I wrote 3 more words in my notebook, below Kepler, below the date, in the margins small and neat. Wait. The session continued. The Velhari signed the designation record. The Solon Compact harmonized their approval. The Cadrith First Voice formally entered humanity into the Galactic Accords Class 4 registry, which would have legal weight across 4,000 inhabited systems, and which meant that anything done to a human being in those systems could be filed under non-jurisdictional biotic attrition and forgotten before the ink dried. When the session ended, I packed my notebook into my briefcase. I stood up from the ledge. Owen stood with me, quiet the way young people get when they have realized something enormous and have not yet decided whether to be angry or defeated. The Cadrith First Voice passed within 12 feet of section peripheral 7 on its way to the exit. 7 eyes forward, already moving to the next thing. I watched it pass. Hell of a thing, I said. Owen looked at me. What do we do now? I snapped my briefcase shut. Get me a line to Adrian Cole, I said, and find out where the coffee machine is. The coffee on the station was not coffee. I want to say that clearly and without exaggeration. It came from a vending unit in the corridor outside the observer quarters, and it was brown, and it was hot, and that is the full extent of its relationship to coffee. The texture was wrong. The smell was wrong. There was an aftertaste that the machine's label described in 6 languages as warm grain essence, which is what you call something when you are too embarrassed to call it what it is. I drank it every morning. I was still on the station because no one had told me to leave. I was insignificant. That was the official record now, stamped and filed and distributed across 4,000 systems, and insignificant things do not get formally expelled. They just get ignored. I had been handed, completely by accident, the most useful thing in the galaxy. Nobody watching. The first report came in 11 days after the designation vote. A Shathari privateer vessel licensed, bonded, operating entirely within the newly adjusted Accord framework, had stopped a human cargo transport in the outer belt. The cargo was agricultural equipment. The crew was 7 people. The earpiece rendered the Shathari filing as non-jurisdictional biotic resource assessment, which, once I had read the attached manifest, I understood meant that they had taken the equipment, the transport, and filed the crew under attrition. 7 names, I wrote them all down. Danny Flores, Petra Walsh's brother-in-law. I did not know that then. I found out 3 weeks later and did not go back and add it. The name was enough. Owen brought me the report in person, which told me that he had already read it, and that he was no longer in the stage where he found things beautiful. There will be a formal inquiry, he said. There won't, I said. He looked at me. Class 4 designation means there is no jurisdiction. No jurisdiction means there is no inquiry. There is just a file. I took a drink of the not coffee, and then another file, and then another one after that. Then what do we do? I had already been on the phone with Adrian Cole for 6 of the 11 days since the vote. Adrian was back on Earth, technically employed by the Commerce Department, practically employed by me in the specific sense that I had known him for 20 years, and he answered when I called, and he was the kind of person who understood that the most important number in any room was never the one being discussed out loud. "What we do," I said, "is we count things." I watched Owen process that. He was smart enough not to ask the obvious follow-up. He was also smart enough to sit down and open his own notebook. I told him what I had started mapping in the 2 weeks since the vote. Not military infrastructure, not weapons. The Cadrith had enough of those to make that conversation pointless. What I was mapping was something else entirely. The Velhari Compact was the 4th largest economy in the Accord. Their trade corridor in the Eastern Belt moved roughly 60% of all agricultural goods between the outer systems. They had been running that corridor on a fixed tariff exemption granted by the Cadrith in exchange for Velhari support on a series of votes 12 years ago. The exemption was solid, unassailable. Unless you looked at 3 agricultural debt instruments that the Velhari had quietly signed with a series of outer belt suppliers over the past 8 years. Suppliers that, through 2 layers of proxy licensing, Adrian had traced back to human-owned holding companies. "They signed with us," Owen said. "They signed with a Velhari subsidiary that signed with a Drossen intermediary that signed with a company registered in the Accord's Free Trade Annex under a Class 3 biotic charter." I looked at him. The charter was filed 6 years ago, before the Class 4 vote, back when we were merely unimportant instead of officially insignificant. He sat with that. "So we own their debt. We have partial claim on instruments that represent a meaningful portion of their corridor operating costs. Yes, I drank the not coffee. Nobody checked. Why would you check? We were insignificant." The second report came in 19 days after the vote. Callaway Station, 83 people, filed under attrition. The station had been running a human-operated relay for a Solon compact communication network, licensed, paid, contracted. The Solon had let the contract expire the day the Class 4 designation passed. The station, without its operating agreement, had no Accord protection. The Shathari filed it the same week. I wrote 83 names. It took 40 minutes. When I was done, I put the notebook in my briefcase and went to get more not coffee and stood in the corridor for a while and looked at the wall. I stood there long enough to memorize the surface texture of it. The color, which was not quite gray and not quite blue, and the way it caught the artificial light in the corridor at a slight angle. I stood there until the feeling in my chest became something I recognized. Something familiar, something I had learned a long time ago to reach for the way you reach for a tool you know works. Anger rushed through me, sweet and familiar, and I let it settle. I did not name the other thing underneath it. The name was not useful. What was useful was the map I was building, and the calls Adrian was making back home, and the quiet, slow, invisible work of being somewhere that nobody thought to look. 14 days after Callaway, I attended a full council session on outer belt trade regularization. I sat in section peripheral 7. I listened. I took notes, not on what was being discussed, but on how it was being discussed, who deferred to whom, which delegates arrived early, which species made eye contact with the Cadrith before votes and which ones waited, the load-bearing relationships in a structure that had been standing so long nobody thought to check the foundations. After the session, a Solon Compact delegate stopped me in the corridor. He was tall, resonant, and looked at me the way you look at something you were not expecting to still be present. "You are still here," he said. The earpiece dropped his tone 3 registers from his actual harmonic output, which I had learned meant he was genuinely confused. "I am still here," I agreed. "Your classification," he began, "makes me non-jurisdictional, yes." I looked up at him, but not non-present. "I still have observer credentials, filed and approved. No one has revoked them." I smiled. I imagine no one thought there was a reason to. He looked at me for a long moment, then he moved on. "I noted it in my log. Not what he said, just Solon delegate made eye contact, unprompted, first time in 19 months. I wrote 3 words below it. They are watching. I called Adrian that night. How many of those proxy licenses went through? I asked. 41 confirmed, 6 pending, 2 that I think go through if we file before end of quarter. File them. Mara, he said. File them, Adrian. He was quiet for a moment. He had been my friend for 20 years, which meant he knew when to push back and when to recognize that the decision was already made. The medical stations. Under Velhari proxy license, yes, which means any action against them is technically an action against a Velhari-registered facility, which means the Shathari need a Kadrith counter-authorization before they move, which buys us time. Time, he said. Time, I said. I poured the last of the evening's not coffee. It had gone cold. It tasted exactly the same cold as it did hot, which should have bothered me more than it did. There is something else, Adrian said. Tell me. The Kadrith mining claim in Sector 9, the one on the outer belt, you know the one. I knew the one. We pulled the original filing, 18 years old, Accord Treaty Clause 7 Provisional, subsection Biotic Rights. He paused. They filed it before the Class 3 to 4 distinction was standardized. There is a provisional signatory line in the original claim document. I put down the cup. And under provisional treaty signatory status, I said. Humanity technically holds co-acknowledgement rights on the claim, Adrian said. It is not ownership, but it is standing. It is legal standing in an accord filing. I sat down on the edge of my bunk. The station hummed around me, the low, constant sound of recycled air and distant machinery, the sound of a place designed to house the important while tolerating the unimportant in the margins. Nobody corrected it, I said. Nobody corrected it, Adrian confirmed. Why would they? It was a clerical note on a filing involving insignificant biotic matter. I looked at the ceiling. How long have you known? 3 weeks, he said. I wanted to be sure. I closed my eyes, opened them. The ceiling was still there. Get me a complete list of every accord filing that includes a biotic provisional status notation from the last 20 years, I said. Every one, Adrian. I do not care how small. I could hear him already typing. You are building something, he said. I am counting things, I said. I told you that. I put the phone down. I picked up my notebook. I opened it to the first page where I had written Kepler alone the day the vote passed. I turned the page. I started writing. 18 months is a long time to be invisible. It is also, if you use it correctly, exactly enough time. I kept filing motions. I want to be clear that I knew each one would be denied. That was not the point. The point was that every motion I filed required a procedural response, and every procedural response required a delegate to spend 12 minutes reading a document they found completely pointless. And 12 minutes is 12 minutes, and 12 minutes spent reading my motions was 12 minutes not spent on something else. I was also, during those 12 minutes, reading their responses. Carefully, the way you read a person's face when they think you are looking at the floor. By the 6th month, I had a working map of every block relationship on the council floor. Not guesses, not inferences. Documented patterns, cross-referenced across 43 sessions, showing exactly who moved when the Kadrith moved, who hesitated, who consulted privately before the vote, and most usefully, who had stopped bothering to read my motions at all. The ones who stopped reading were the ones who thought I was already finished. I was careful around those ones. Owen had been reassigned back to Earth at the end of month 4. Protocol, standard rotation for junior aides. He shook my hand before he left, and he did not look like someone who found things beautiful anymore, and I thought that was both a loss and the necessary cost of understanding something true. Take care of yourself, he said. Take notes, I told him, Every meeting, everything, even the things that seem small. He nodded. He had learned by then. I worked alone after that, which suited me. I have always worked better in the space between what people expect and what is actually happening, and that space is narrower when there are witnesses. The proxy medical stations went up in month 5. 47 of them, distributed across the outer belt under Velhari subsidiary registration. The Velhari were confused about this at first. There had been a great deal of paperwork and a number of licensing agreements that their administrative division had apparently processed without full senior review. Which is what happens when you are a very large economy, and the paperwork is coming from a Class 4 biotic entity that cannot possibly be relevant to anything. Each station had a staff of 4, all human, all recruited specifically because they had the quality I valued most, which is the ability to be extremely present while appearing completely unremarkable. They were doctors mostly, a couple of engineers, one woman who had been a lawyer before she decided medicine was more honest, and who I trusted more than anyone on the station because she had my same talent for reading a room from the corner of it. Her name was Nora. Nora ran the relay station at Outpost 7 Delta, and she called me every 2 weeks, always on a Velhari-registered communication frequency, always about medical supply logistics, and always with a secondary data packet attached to the end of the call that contained the actual information I needed. Month 7, Solon Compact Eastern Relay is running through a human-licensed frequency band. Usage rate at 91% capacity. No redundancy built. The Solon had not filed for a secondary license because the primary license, when it was first registered, was filed under a treaty clause that assumed the licensing party would remain in good standing with the Accord. Class 4 biotic matter cannot be in good standing with the Accord. Class 4 biotic matter cannot be in bad standing either. Class 4 biotic matter simply is, the way furniture simply is, and furniture cannot hold a communication license. Except it already did. 18 years ago it had filed for one, and the Solon had been using it ever since, and no one had reviewed the filing because why would you review a license held by furniture? Month 9. Adrian called me at 2 in the morning with a sound in his voice that I had only heard from him twice before, both times when he had found something that changed the shape of everything. Mara, he said. Talk, I said. You know the Kadrith Grain Redistribution Initiative, the one they announced last quarter, the expansion into Sector 12 outer systems. Yes. They need a shipping route. Specifically, they need a route through the Drossen Corridor. And the Drossen Corridor transit rights are co-managed under a 9-party Accord charter from about 30 years back. Originally 12 parties, 3 dropped out. That leaves 9 active co-managers with equal procedural weight. I was sitting up in my bunk by then. The station hummed. I was already ahead of where he was going, but I let him get there himself because it was his work and he had earned the arrival. Humanity signed as a provisional party when the charter was first filed, he said. Standard provisional status, 3 tiers below full co-manager. But 2 of the 9 remaining co-managers have reduced their participation status since the original filing. Reducing the full tier count. Reducing the full tier count to 7. Which means provisional status parties automatically elevate to associate standing to maintain the 9-party minimum required by the charter's own terms. The room was very quiet. We have associate standing in the Drossen Corridor Transit Charter, I said. As of 6 months ago, technically yes, Adrian said. The moment the second co-manager reduced status, the math shifted. Nobody noticed because there is an automated standing calculation clause that nobody has manually reviewed since the charter was filed. I thought about that for a moment. I thought about what associate standing meant. It did not mean control. It did not mean veto power. It meant procedural voice. The right to be heard in a filing process. the right to raise an objection that required a formal response before the charter action could proceed. The Cadrith needed the Drossen corridor for their grain initiative. The Cadrith needed the grain initiative for Sector 12, where they had made significant political commitments to 3 allied species. The Cadrith needed Sector 12 secured before the annual Accord budget allocation, because the budget allocation funded the patrol fleet that enforced Class 4 designations in the Outer Belt. I sat in the dark for a while. "How many threads do we have now, Adrian?" He pulled up his document. I heard pages turning, actual paper pages, because Adrian was the kind of man who printed important things. The Velhari debt instruments, the Solon frequency license, the Cadrith mining claim provisional notation, the Drossen corridor associate standing, 14 smaller proxy agreements across the Outer Belt. He paused, and the 712 names. I had been keeping the names since day one. Every person filed under attrition. Every colony incident logged and dismissed. I had names, dates, filing numbers, and the name of the Accord delegate who had signed each dismissal. "The names are not leverage," Owen had said once before he went home. "No," I had said. He had not understood yet. He would later. Month 11, I attended a council session on Outer Belt security regularization. I sat in section Peripheral 7. I sketched the chamber in my notebook, not a memory exercise. I sketched the distance from the observer ledge to the floor recognition system. I sketched the acoustic angles of the chamber, where sound carried cleanest, where it bounced wrong, where a voice at normal conversational volume would be heard clearly by the center dais. I had known for 8 months that I would eventually need to speak in this room in a way that could not be dismissed as procedural noise. I was learning the room the way you learn a road you are planning to drive at speed. Month 15, Nora called me. "Something new," she said. "Go ahead." "The Shathari privateer company that handled the Callaway filing," she said. "Their operating license is underwritten by a Cadrith-affiliated charter fund. Standard arrangement. But the charter fund's third-party audit clause, which is a standard Accord transparency requirement, lists their external auditor as a firm registered in the Accord's Commerce Annex." I was already writing. "And the Commerce Annex registration," Nora continued, "was co-filed under a multi-species development agreement that includes a provisional human commercial representative signatory from 12 years ago." I stopped writing. "We are technically a named party in the audit chain of the company that filed Callaway," I said. "Technically, yes." I put the pen down, picked it up again. "Nora." "Yes." "How are the stations running?" "Good," she said. "We treated a Velhari ship crew last week. Engine accident, 4 injured. They were grateful. The station commander offered a formal letter of thanks to Velhari Station Authority." "Under what name?" "Velhari Outer Medical Initiative, 7 Delta Branch." "Good," I said. "Keep it that way." I went back to my sketch of the chamber. I added a note at the bottom: floor recognition system, 3 seconds minimum. I had read the manual. I had read it 17 times over 18 months. I knew every procedural rule, every recognition window, every exception clause and bylaw and administrative override. I underlined the line about observer units in non-designation sessions. In non-designation sessions, observer unit floor recognition was subject to standard procedural equality. The designation was already decided. That session was done. Everything after was a non-designation session. I drew a small square at the bottom of the sketch and wrote inside it, "Your turn." Then I closed the notebook and went to get not coffee and stood in the corridor and thought about timing and patience and the difference between waiting and preparing, and how those two things look identical from the outside until the exact moment they do not. Month 17, Adrian called. The cadre filed for Drossen Corridor transit rights, he said. I looked at my notebook. When does the charter response window open? 14 days. How long does it stay open? Standard charter procedure, 30 days from filing. I did the math. That puts us inside the budget allocation window. Yes, he said, it does. I was quiet for a moment. Adrian, I said, how many motions can you prepare in 14 days? A pause, the pause of a man looking at a document and counting. How many do you need? He said. 17, I said, at minimum. I want 20 if you can manage it. He exhaled. Get me the economists, he said, and the trade lawyers. You have both, I said. You have everyone. We have been building this for 18 months. He hung up. I went back to my room. I opened my notebook to the sketch of the chamber floor. I thought about the cadre's first voice, 9 feet tall, 7 eyes cycling gold and white, delivering the word insignificant the way a technician reads a test result. I thought about Danny Flores and Callaway Station, and 700 names in a notebook. I thought about Kepler. That single word on the first page, alone, the way the important things are always alone. I closed the notebook. 14 days, I said to the room. The room hummed back. The session was called for 9th hour, station time. I arrived at the chamber at 8th hour, 20 minutes. I sat in section peripheral 7. I put my briefcase on the ledge. I took out my notebook and my pen and a secondary document folder, which I set to my right, aligned with the edge of the ledge exactly. I had 17 motions. Adrian had managed 22. He had been awake for most of the 14 days. Him and a team of 4 trade lawyers and 2 economists back on Earth, working through a filing structure that used every thread we had built over 18 months. Every proxy agreement, every provisional signatory notation, every clerical oversight that nobody had corrected because correcting it would have required believing, even for a moment, that the furniture was capable of filing paperwork. I put all 22 motions in the folder in order of deployment, and I closed the folder, and I looked at the chamber. It was filling the way it always filled. The Velhari in their second ring positions, the Solon compact forming their resonance formation in the third, the Cadrith taking the central dais with the particular ease of species who have never in their history needed to rush. Species for whom the room has always been arranged in advance. The Cadrith first voice took the dais at exactly 9th hour. This session is called for final vote on the formal incorporation of Class 4 designation parameters into Permanent Accord Statute, it said. Passage will standardize Class 4 administrative procedure across all member jurisdictions for a minimum period of 50 standard cycles. 50 years. That was what they were here to make permanent. The Velhari delegate produced an affirmation tone. The Solon compact harmonized. Procedural, routine, a formality. I raised my hand. 3 seconds. I held it for exactly 3 seconds in the recognition field. The system registered. The Cadrith first voice paused. 7 eyes moved to section peripheral 7. I watched all 7 of them settle on me with the particular quality of attention that is not respect but is, at minimum, recall. The observer unit from Sol 3, it said. Human observer provisional status, I said. Mara raise. Sol 3, yes, I stood up. I have a floor motion. This is a voting session, the first voice said. Observer units do not carry floor rights during it began. During designation proceedings, I said. Section 7, subsection 4 of the Accord Floor Procedure Charter. I opened my notebook to the page where I had written it out, word for word, 3 months ago. This is a statute incorporation session, not a designation proceeding. Under Section 12 of the same charter, observer units with valid standing credentials carry standard floor procedural rights in non-designation sessions. The chamber was quiet. not the performative quiet of a body waiting for the next expected thing. The actual quiet of 37 species recalculating. The Cadrith first voice looked at its procedure aid. The aid produced a tablet. There was a brief exchange in the first voice's frequency range that the earpiece translated as confirmed procedure citation, and then, a moment later, confirmed. The floor recognizes the human observer, it said, and the 7 eyes held on me with something that had changed slightly in quality, and I noted the change and stored it and kept my face exactly where it was. "Thank you," I said. "I have 22 motions." I opened the folder. First motion, Human Provisional Signatory Status under Accord Treaty Clause 7, as applied to the Cadrith Outer Belt mining claim filed 18 years prior, confers standing to request a formal administrative review of claim terms under updated biotic classification parameters. I am requesting that review. The Velhari delegate's tone shifted. The earpiece called it procedural concern, senior register. Second motion, under the Drossen Corridor Transit Charter, associate standing parties, of which humanity achieved automatic associate standing status 6 months ago due to full-tier co-manager reduction, have the right to raise a formal procedural objection to any transit request filed within the open charter window. I am raising that objection with respect to the Cadrith transit application filed 14 days ago. The Solon compact harmonics dropped to a frequency, the earpiece rendered as unexpected development. Third motion, under Accord transparency requirements, any audit chain involving provisional human commercial signatory registration, which applies to the third-party audit structure of a Shathari privateer licensing fund, whose operating records include the Callaway Station incident of month 2 of this cycle. I am requesting full audit disclosure and review understanding signatory rights. The chamber began to move, not physically, energetically, the way a large, confident structure moves when something it assumed was weight-bearing turns out to be something else. I kept going. Motion 4. The Solon Compact Eastern Relay Frequency License, registered under a treaty clause requiring the licensing party to maintain good accord standing, was subject to review now that the classification status of the licensing party had been administratively altered without corresponding license review. I was requesting that review. Motion 5. The 47 Velhari registered medical facilities in the Outer Belt, operating under subsidiary licenses connected to 3 outstanding Velhari debt instruments with human-side holding company claims, were requesting formal accord registration as recognized biotic service providers, which under Article 3 of the Outer Belt Development Charter entitled their staff to Class 2 provisional protection status regardless of species designation. I did not pause between motions. I had learned the rhythm of this room over 18 months. I knew how long a delegate needed to process before the silence became a decision to interrupt. I stayed half a beat ahead of that silence, every time. Motion 6, Motion 7, Motion 8. The Cadrith first voice tried to speak at Motion 9. This session, it began, is in procedural motion, yes, I said. I have 13 more motions. Each one is filed under valid accord procedure, citing specific charter clauses, with full documentation in the supplementary folder being distributed to each delegation by my associate, Adrian Cole, via the standard accord communication channel, which, as a registered observer unit, I have the right to use during active floor sessions. Adrian was back on Earth. He had been transmitting the document packages to each delegation's communication address for the past 4 minutes. He had the timing down to the second. We had rehearsed it 8 times. I watched the tablets light up across the chamber. I watched delegates look at their tablets and then at each other and then at the Cadrith dais. Motion 10. The provisional signatory notation on the Drossen Corridor Charter created a mandatory 30-day review period before any transit approval could be finalized. The Cadrith Transit application was therefore in a mandated review hold, effective from the moment I raised the objection, which I had done, in motion 2, which was 8 minutes ago. The Cadrith first voice was very still. All 7 eyes had not moved from me since motion 4. I had thought about this moment for 14 months. I had wondered what it would feel like, whether there would be satisfaction in it or something else entirely. It felt like work. It felt like doing a thing correctly after a long time of preparing to do it correctly. It felt like the moment after you have loaded everything into the vehicle and checked the route, and confirmed the timing, and you put your hand on the door and you open it. It felt like beginning. Motion 11. Given the Cadrith Outer Belt Mining Claim Review request now on record, all revenue operations from the claim were subject to provisional administrative freeze under standard dispute procedure, pending review. That one landed differently. The Velhari tone shifted again, higher this time, which the earpiece read as significant concern. The Cadrith first voice's bioluminescent pattern changed. I had spent 18 months learning those patterns. The one it was showing now I had only seen once before, at the session where 2 Velhari delegates had challenged a Cadrith border agreement, and the first voice had spent 4 hours unraveling their case thread by thread. It was the pattern for being in a room where the floor is not where you thought it was. I kept going. Motion 12, Motion 13, Motion 14. Motion 15 was the Shathari privateer audit. Motion 16 was a request for formal accord recognition of the 712 names I had in my notebook. Formal recognition that each of those individuals was a protected biotic entity under the provisional signatory rights that humanity held in 4 separate active accord filings, and that each incident in which those individuals had been harmed under Class 4 administrative permission was therefore subject to retroactive jurisdictional review. The chamber noise was not silence anymore. It was the sound of 37 species processing simultaneously, each in their own register, all of it feeding through my earpiece as a layered wall of tones and harmonics and atmospheric shifts that the translation matrix was rendering as a series of variations on the same phrase. This was not anticipated. Motion 17, Motion 18. Motion 19 was the Drossen corridor. I read it clearly. I read every clause. The associate standing calculation, the automatic elevation trigger, the mandatory review window, the budget allocation timeline, the Cadrith Grain Initiative dependency, and the practical reality that without corridor access on schedule, the Grain Initiative stalled. And without the Grain Initiative, 3 allied species in Sector 12 were waiting on a political commitment that would not be met, and without Sector 12 secured, the Accord budget vote in 6 weeks became uncertain in ways that no one at the center dais had factored. Because why would you factor furniture? Why would you check the math on a charter signed by something you had categorized as insignificant and then forgotten? Motion 20, 21. Motion 22 was short. Final motion. Humanity formally requests reclassification review under Accord Biotic Standing Article 1, on grounds that the Class 4 designation was assigned without full assessment of existing treaty relationships, provisional signatory status, and active Accord legal standing, all of which predate the designation vote and were not entered into the designation record. I closed the folder. I looked at the Cadrith first voice. I believe there may have been an administrative oversight, I said. The chamber was completely quiet. The kind of quiet that is not waiting for the next expected thing. The kind that comes when the expected thing has not arrived and the room is trying to figure out where it went. The Velhari delegate's tone was very low and very flat. The Solon Compact had stopped harmonizing entirely. The Cadrith first voice stood at the center dais with its bioluminescent pattern cycling through a sequence I had never seen before and could not find in any of my 18 months of documentation. The vote on permanent Class 4 statute did not happen. Not at that session. The Velhari delegate formally requested recess for procedural review. The request required only one seconding vote. The Solon Compact seconded it before the first voice could respond. Recess was granted. I picked up my folder. I picked up my notebook. I put them both in my briefcase and snapped it shut and stood up from section Peripheral 7 for what I was fairly certain was the last time. I walked out of the chamber. In the corridor, I found the vending unit. I put in the correct number of credits. I took the cup. It was warm and brown and wrong in all the ways it was always wrong. I drank it anyway. Hell of a thing, I said to no one in particular. My earpiece chimed, Adrian. I watched the feed, he said, all 22. Yes. How are you feeling? I thought about that for a moment. I thought about 17 motions and 700 names and a single word on the first page of my notebook. Like I have a lot of work left, I said. Adrian laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind you only get from people who have been afraid for a long time and are breathing for the first time in a while. They are going to call you, he said, the Cadrith, probably by end of day. I know, I said. What are you going to say? I took another drink of the not coffee. I am going to let them finish their sentence first, I said. Then I am going to say what I have been planning to say for 18 months. Adrian was quiet. Get some sleep, Adrian, I said. You earned it. I hung up. I stood in the corridor and finished the not coffee and thought about the shape of a room when it finally shows you what it actually is. Not the version it presented. Not the version designed to make you feel small. The real version, load-bearing and contingent, and held together with paperwork that nobody thought to check, because nobody thought the furniture was paying attention. I had been paying attention. I dropped the cup in the recycling unit. I straightened my jacket. I picked up my briefcase. The earpiece chimed. Cadrith communication request. I answered. Commander Reyes, the first voice said. It used the word commander, not observer, not the Sol 3 tolerated witness. Commander. First time in 18 months. First voice, I said. We would like to arrange a private session. I am available tomorrow morning, I said, after 9th hour. A pause. The Cadrith did not get paused at. This was, I suspected, a new experience. 9th hour will be acceptable, it said. Good, I said. I will bring coffee. The meeting room the Cadrith chose was not the council chamber. It was smaller, still large by human standards, ceilings 12 meters up, walls of a material that caught light and held it in the way expensive things always do. A table in the center, long and dark and smooth. 6 Cadrith delegates already seated, the first voice standing at the head. No section Peripheral 7, no observer ledge. I sat at the table. I put my briefcase to my right, my coffee cup, from the vending unit, warm and wrong as always, to my left, and my notebook in the center closed. I had arrived 2 minutes early. I had sat down without waiting to be shown to a seat. Both of these things were, by Cadrith protocol, a significant departure from standard visitor behavior, and I had done both of them deliberately, and the first voice had watched me do both of them without comment, which told me something useful about the morning's available range of motion. Commander Reyes, the first voice began. First voice, I said. The council has reviewed the motions filed yesterday. It paused. There are, as you noted, certain administrative matters that require clarification. I opened my notebook. I found the page I wanted and set it in front of me, the page that said wait, 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 written 18 months ago the day after the vote. There are also, the first voice continued, certain elements of yesterday's session that the council found irregular. Which elements, I said. The first voice's bioluminescent pattern shifted, gold and pale white moving slowly. It was the first time I had seen that pattern used at slow speed. Every other time I had observed it, it was cycling fast, confidence, authority, conclusion already reached. Slow meant something was still being worked out. The volume of simultaneous procedural motions, it said, is not in itself irregular. The specific clustering of those motions around what appear to be pre-existing, dormant treaty relationships is less standard. Those relationships exist in accord filings, I said. I did not create them. I found them. You found them, it repeated, as if testing the weight of each word. 18 months of looking, I said. It turns out that when you tell something it is insignificant, it stops being useful to pretend it is not there. It just becomes very quiet. The first voice was still for a moment. 6 delegates behind it were also still. The chamber had the quality of a room where everyone is waiting to learn whether the next sentence changes everything. The council, the first voice said, is prepared to consider a revised approach to human classification, a more nuanced framework. The word that was used in the original designation may represent it began. Translation artifact, I said. It paused. Those were going to be your words, first voice. I am familiar with how this conversation begins. I have sat at many tables where the person across from me needed to cover a decision they regretted without saying they regretted it. I turned my notebook to the page I had prepared for this moment. A list. Names. Not the 700 from the attrition files, those were for later, for the formal record. These were the 72 names I had gathered in the first 6 months, the ones with the most complete files, the ones with families who had submitted formal inquiries to the Accord that had been automatically dismissed on account of the Class 4 designation. I read them out loud. It took 9 minutes. I read every name clearly with full attention, and I did not rush and I did not editorialize and I did not look up from the page. A name is a name. It does not need help from the reader to do what it does. When I finished, I closed the notebook. Those are people who were harmed under the administrative permission granted by the word you are now considering revising for translation accuracy, I said. I want to be precise about that. The first voice's pattern was not moving at all now, held steady in a pale neutral tone I had never documented before. The delegates behind it were similarly still. What does humanity want? It said. It was a direct question. The Cadrith did not ask direct questions as a rule. They built frameworks and let conclusions emerge from them like something inevitable. A direct question was, I knew, a significant concession in itself. I had thought about this moment for a long time. I had written several versions of what I intended to say and crossed most of them out. The version I settled on was the shortest, which had taken the longest to arrive at. A seat, I said, a full seat, not section peripheral 7, not observer status. A full delegate seat at the main table, with floor rights, vote rights and treaty standing equivalent to Class 2 associate membership. The first voice's pattern shifted. Class 2 associate membership is reserved for species with established. It began. Established what? I said. Established presence in Accord filings. Humanity holds active provisional standing in 4 treaty charters, associate standing in a corridor transit agreement, and co-acknowledgement rights in an outer belt mining claim. We have more Accord filing presence than 2 of your current Class 2 members. Check the registry. A delegate to the first voice's left did something with a tablet. A pause. Then something quiet in frequency range that the earpiece translated as verified. Class 2 associate membership, I said, with full retroactive application of associate protections to all human individuals and installations, effective from the date of original provisional treaty filing, which predates the Class 4 designation vote by 6 years. The first voice was quiet. I picked up my coffee cup, drank, put it down. There is also the matter of the review, I said. Formal accord review of all incidents filed under Class 4 administrative permission during the period of the designation. All of them. The Callaway incidents, the Shathari privateer filings, all of them entered into the permanent accord record with full disclosure of classification status at the time of each incident. That is not a standard procedure, the first voice said. No, I said, it is not. Why is it necessary? I opened my notebook to the first page, the page that had one word on it. I turned it toward the first voice so it could read it. The earpiece had no translation for that word. It was a place name. It did not translate. Because the next species you call insignificant, I said, will be watching how you handled the first time. The room was very quiet. I thought about what that word on that page meant, what it had always meant. A colony on the edge of a system that was not important enough to defend and not valuable enough to evacuate and not significant enough to warrant a formal review of what happened to it. A settlement of 407 people who were told, first by a general and then by a government committee, that their situation was regrettable but non-jurisdictional, that there were larger concerns, that the calculation had been made and they were, in the final accounting, on the wrong side of it. 319 of them did not survive long enough to be told that. I had been one of the 88. I had been told, for the 18 years since, that I was not a reliable voice on the matter because I was not objective. That was correct, I was not objective. I was the furniture that learned where the load-bearing walls were. The first voice spoke. The review, it said, would create significant administrative burden. Yes, I said, it will. The full delegate seat would require a revision to accord membership charter. Yes, I said, it will. The retroactive protection application would affect the standing of several outstanding privateer licenses. Yes, I said, it will. The first voice looked at me. 7 eyes, all of them steady, all of them doing the same thing they had been doing since I sat down at this table, trying to find the part of this that I would accept less than, the part where the number could be negotiated down, the part where the furniture had limits. I looked back at it. First voice, I said, I have been sitting in this building for 18 months. I have attended 111 sessions. I have filed 47 procedural motions and had 46 of them denied. I have drunk more warm grain essence from your vending unit than any human being in history, and I want you to understand that is not a small sacrifice. I paused. I did not come here to negotiate. I came here because you invited me to a negotiation, and I am telling you what the terms are. And if the council finds those terms unacceptable, it said. I looked at my folder on the table. The 22 motions from yesterday were already in motion. The Drossen Corridor review was on a 30-day clock. The Velhari debt instruments could be called at any time. The Solon frequency license review had already been flagged by 3 accord administrators who had apparently never been asked to look at it before and were now very concerned about what they were seeing. Then the 22 motions continue to process, I said, individually, through standard procedure, each one requiring formal response within the accord charter timeframes. The Drossen Corridor stays in review hold through the budget allocation window. The Cadrith Grain Initiative stalls. Sector 12 waits. I took a drink of the not coffee. I have been told I am insignificant. I do not require a great deal of resources to be patient. The first voice's bioluminescent pattern cycled once, slowly, through a sequence I had not seen before. The earpiece, after a moment, offered a translation. Recalibration, it said. One of the delegates behind the first voice spoke quietly, then another. The frequency range was below the earpiece's clear translation threshold. I caught fragments, treaty standing confirmed, administrative burden assessment, timeline pressure, Sector 12, precedent management. Precedent management, that one came through clean. I thought about what it meant that they were worried about precedent. It meant they were already thinking about what came after this room. what the shape of the accord looked like with a human delegate seat at the main table, and a formal review on the books and the word insignificant in the permanent record next to 712 names. It meant they were building the next version of the room in their heads. Good, that was exactly where I needed them. There is one additional item, I said. The first voice's pattern paused mid-cycle. The word itself, I said. Insignificant. Class 4 secondary designation. I want it in the permanent accord record, not removed. I want it preserved with its full administrative history, including every filing made under its authority and every incident that occurred as a result. I want it read aloud at the opening of each accord session for the next 100 years, not as punishment, as record. As the kind of record that reminds a room what words do when nobody checks what they have been given permission to do. The first voice was very still. You want it preserved, it said, not struck. You cannot learn from what you erase, I said. You can only learn from what you read every morning until the reading is no longer just a formality. The room was quiet for a long time. Outside the chamber, the station moved around us, recycled air and distant machinery, and the low hum of a structure designed to house the important while tolerating the rest at the margins. I had spent 18 months in those margins. I knew their dimensions now. I knew what fit in them and what could be built in them while the important people in the center rooms were busy being important. The first voice spoke. The council will convene a formal review of classification structure, it said. A Class 2 associate membership proposal will be placed before the full council within 10 days. With full retroactive protection application, I said. With retroactive protection application as a condition of the proposal, it said. The accord record review will be formalized as a parallel administrative process. And the permanent record reading. A pause. And the permanent record reading, it said. Terms to be finalized in session. I closed my notebook. I picked up my empty coffee cup. I put it in my pocket because there was no recycling unit in this room, and I was not going to leave it on their table. I stood up. Thank you for the meeting. First voice, I said. Commander Reyes, the 7 eyes held on me. You have been here 18 months. Yes. You were aware when the designation was passed that all of this was a possible outcome. I thought about the first page of the notebook. I thought about the word I had written the day of the vote, alone on the page, in the kind of silence that comes after a thing you already knew was going to happen finally happens. I was aware, I said, that patience and paperwork have ended more empires than weapons ever did. I picked up my briefcase. I was also aware, I said, that nobody in the history of this building has ever bothered to read the full Accord Charter Procedure Manual. You read it, the first voice said. Twice, I said, the second time I took notes. I walked to the door, I put my hand on it. First voice, I said, without turning around. For what it is worth, and I want to be honest with you because I think honesty will serve us better going forward than the alternative. I do not want an adversarial relationship with this council. I never did. What I want is a seat at a table where the people sitting at it understand that the cost of calling something insignificant is that the thing you called insignificant stops being useful to you and starts being useful to itself. I opened the door. Humanity has been very useful to itself these past 18 months, I said. Imagine what we can do with a seat. I walked out. The corridor was quiet. The vending unit was 30 feet to my left. I walked to it. I put in the credits. I took the cup. It was warm. It was brown. It was wrong in every specific way it had been wrong every morning for 18 months. I drank it standing in the corridor with my briefcase in one hand and my notebook in my jacket pocket and the distant hum of the station all around me. My earpiece chimed, Nora. I heard, she said. How did it go? It went, I said. That is all. I thought about the 712 names, and the one word on the first page, and the 18 months of not coffee, and the chamber, with the 400-meter ceiling, that was designed to make you feel small, and what it meant that I had sat in it for 18 months, and never once felt what it was designed to make me feel. "We have a lot of work ahead," I said. "We do," she said. "How are the stations?" "Running well. We treated a Solon compact crew last week. Engine fire, 2 crew members, both recovered." "Did they say anything?" "The crew commander asked who we were," she said. "I told him we were a Velhari medical subsidiary." "And?" "He looked at my face for a long time," she said. "Then he said, 'You are human.' I said, 'Yes.' He said, 'The insignificant ones.' I said, 'Yes.' He said, 'You saved my crew.' I said, 'Yes.'" A pause. He did not say anything else, but he filed a formal letter of thanks to the Accord Outer Belt Medical Registry. "Under what name?" "Under our actual name," she said. "Outer Belt Human Medical Initiative, 7 Delta Branch." I put my hand on the wall of the corridor. The station hummed under my palm. "Good," I said. I finished the not coffee. I dropped the cup in the recycling unit. I opened my notebook to the first page. One word, Kepler, alone in the margin, the way the important things always are. I turned the page. I wrote, "Lord have mercy on the room that forgets what the furniture knows." I closed the notebook. I straightened my jacket. I called Adrian. "We have 10 days, I said. "Get the full team. I want the Class 2 proposal reviewed before the council drafts it. I want our language in their draft before they decide what our language is." "Already on it," he said. "Mara." "Yes." "They called us insignificant." "Yes," I said. "Hell of a thing." I smiled, all teeth. "Hell of a thing," I said. I walked back toward the chamber. My footsteps were even and unhurried. The corridor was the same corridor it had always been. The station hummed around me the way it always hummed. Nothing looked different. Everything was different. Not because of one meeting, or 22 motions, or 18 months of patience dressed up as paperwork. Because of what those things meant, which was this. The room had decided we were furniture, and furniture does not file motions, and furniture does not read manuals, and furniture does not spend 18 months counting the weight that every load-bearing wall in the house is quietly holding. We were not furniture. We had never been furniture. We had simply been waiting for the room to make the kind of mistake that only rooms make when they have never had reason to check what they built their foundations on. They had called us insignificant. They had given us a ledge in the corner and turned away. And we had used the corner. That is what humans do with the corners of things. That is what we have always done. And I walked back into the building that was designed to make me feel small, and I was not small, and I had never been small, and in 10 days the whole galaxy was going to know it. That was a hell of a thing too.